Now on BBC One, Hugh Edwards with the 10 o'clock news.
Tonight at 10, on the eve of polling day, the party leaders make their final appeals to Britain's voters. After a 7-week battle marked by controversy and tragedy, the leaders have been travelling thousands of miles in a final drive to persuade voters. Theresa May returned to the theme she set when she called the election, claiming only she could deliver a successful Brexit.
Give me the authority to speak for Britain. Strengthen my hand as I fight for Britain. Give me your backing, and I will deliver for Britain.
Jeremy Corbyn told his supporters that a Labour government would end austerity and spend more on the NHS and education.
5 more years of Tory cuts, longer waiting lists, underfunded schools in many parts of our country, and hope under Labour.
For the Lib Dems, Tim Farron urged people to consider tactical voting to prevent a Conservative landslide. In Scotland, the SNP is defending the landslide it won last time. It wants a strong voice in the Brexit talks. For UKIP, Paul Nuttall said his party was the only one to be trusted to deliver a no-nonsense Brexit deal. We'll have the latest on the final hours of campaigning, and we'll have a reminder of some of the key policy choices on offer from the parties. Also on the programme, tributes to the victims of the London Bridge attacks by some of the first police officers on the scene. 8 people are now known to have died. In Washington, the sacked former head of the FBI reveals new details about his private meetings with President Trump. And friends and admirers attend a memorial service at Westminster Abbey for the entertainer Ronnie Corbett.
And coming up in Sports Day on BBC News, Andy Murray reaches the semi-finals of the French Open as the defending champion Novak Djokovic is knocked out.
Good evening from the BBC Election Centre. This is where, in 24 hours' time, we'll be following the results as they come in from every part of the United Kingdom. Polling stations open at 7 tomorrow morning after a campaign that in its latter stages has been dominated by the debate about security following those terror attacks in London and Manchester. But on this last full day of campaigning, both Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn have returned to their main policies and messages. Tonight, we'll have the latest on the campaigns. We'll be looking at the key policy proposals. Our first report on the eve of polling day is by our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg.
The incumbent.
Let us reignite the British spirit, because together we can do great things.
The insurgent.
We are people coming together with a view, a vision and a dream of the kind of world that we can create. World of social justice and solidarity.
Theresa May called this election to win it. But it's not her choice. It's not their choice. It's ours. Her script. Trust only her on Brexit, on her experience.
Who do you believe has the will and, crucially, the plan to just get on with the job and deliver?
For Jeremy Corbyn, from day one, arguably from decades ago, it's been all about the alternative. He wants to be Prime Minister, but his supporters and detractors say it's about more than that.
It's not just about electing MPs, it's about what this campaign is about and about what we are offering to the people of this country. So are you up for it in the election of 2017? Are you up for the election of 2017? Which will rewrite the history books of politics in Britain. Rewrite those history books.
A few heckles have followed her on the trail, like the missteps in the last few weeks. She's been criticised over police cuts under pressure on the state of the NHS, but most of all knocked on social care a policy that might have caused alarm on a few Greens like this. Keen to promise a lot, but reluctant to go beyond big goals.
It's about who people trust to have the strong and stable leadership to get the best deal for Britain in Europe, and who has the will and, crucially, the plan to deliver on Brexit.
Legions of his fans, though, want something else. His opponents say the sums don't stack up, but here they love his manifesto. Bigger taxes and spending to pay for free tuition, more healthcare, promises of a much bigger state.
First time ever it's been Jeremy Corbyn's pulling New Labour back into this idea of it being a full-on socialism versus the Conservatives, and it's giving people the opportunity.
I'd say to anybody, vote Labour for crying out loud to help this country get out the muck that we're in with this Tory government, because you don't think about the poor. The poor is suffering in this blinking country.
Our manifesto offers something very, very different. They say, well, it's going to cost a lot of money. Yes, it is. I know that. But, and we're very clear about this, we have fully costed it. 95% of the population will pay no more in tax, no more in national insurance, no more in VAT.
The two main campaigns look so different because the parties are. It's not an election where anyone can say politicians are all the same. They have different visions on Brexit, on immigration, different hopes for the economy. Labour would tax more and spend more on schools and hospitals. Under the Tories, there'd still be cuts to keep trying to balance the books. They have very different takes on the kind of country this is and what they want it to be. And very different leaders who are trying to persuade you to let them take us there.
It's not a contest of who can cover more miles, Mrs. and Mr. May in the Tory plane, but of credibility and authority. The former Remainer who wants to take us out of the EU seemed unassailable. Not now.
We've set out in our manifesto the challenges that we face as a country and how we as government would deliver on those challenges, how we would ensure that we were addressing those challenges.
But isn't it the case you didn't have to call this election and you were asking people to trust you for 5 years after a campaign where the sense is you've said as little as possible?
What I have said to the British people is to be open with them about the challenges this country faces, but also about the opportunities that we have in this country. And I think that's absolutely the right thing to do.
The Tory hope...
why on earth do you want this job?
The core, not the quality of the campaign, will see her home.
My vote would be with Mrs May because of her experience.
More confidence. I think she's a ruthless candidate who can get the country through Brexit, which is what we voted for.
You think she's ruthless?
I think she can be ruthless. We shall see.
Back where it all began. A welcome for the political hero of North London tonight. Anti-nuclear weapons fixed to decades-old principles. Jeremy Corbyn has changed politics dynamics, even if tomorrow he comes up short.
In 7 weeks, we've put together a quite incredible campaign in every part of Britain, every town, every village.
Elections are not straightforward popularity contests. Turnout tomorrow, not tonight, is what really matters. But this contest is not a decision on one day, but a choice that changes lives for years. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News.
Well, with just under 9 hours to go until the polls open, the parties have probably done all they can to get their message across to voters. So what are the prime issues, especially for Conservatives and Labour, that have dominated this election campaign and influenced public opinion? Our deputy political editor, John Pienaar, has spent the day with some voters in Cheshire.
It may feel like a long march, this election, but then Britain is deciding its future, choosing between candidates to run the country. Whether you've joined the battle, like the Labour faithful here in Runcorn today, or you've had other pressing business, people everywhere have been making their minds up.
My mum works in the NHS. She deserves a pay rise. My school, the children who go to school, the two schools have got to find almost £1 million worth of cuts in the next 3 years. My niece goes to university and she's going to leave with £44,000 worth of debt. We've just had enough.
Stop privatising the railways and bring them back into the public, you know, instead of selling them off all to the private franchise.
The glaring differences between the parties and the leaders has grabbed the attention of people who will make such an important, even historic decision tomorrow. Government for the many, not the few, isn't just a Labour slogan. It's what all the parties and both main contenders for Downing Street realise they have to offer post-Brexit Britain. In the hours before the polls open, people are deciding, instinctively in many cases, who they trust to deliver what they think matters most. In deep blue Tatton, Conservatism has grown deep roots. So what is it today that's making Tory support here flourish?
Theresa May has been from the start with the Brexit situation.
So what about the worry some people have that she's going to go for too hard a break? It's going to disrupt and damage the economy?
No, I think she's prepared for that because she's been in, as I say, in it from the start, and therefore she knows the ins and outs, and she's obviously got the economy at heart.
Well, I agree with what she says about helping the older people. Personally, I will lose the benefit for heating.
Yeah.
But probably
doesn't that put you off losing the winter fuel allowance?
Because probably somebody else will need it more than I do. I'm sure the people that really need it will get it.
The race is very nearly over. What comes next? A new government, a new plan, a new place in the world after Brexit. That future starts tomorrow, June the 8th. John Pienaar, BBC News.
A Conservative landslide can only be averted if Labour supporters decide to vote tactically. That's the view of the Lib Dem leader, Tim Farron. He's called on traditional Labour voters to back his party in those areas where it's the main challenger to the Conservatives. Mr Farron, who spent the day touring constituencies in England, claimed that the Prime Minister was taking a big victory for granted. Our political correspondent Vicky Young was travelling with Mr Farron on the Liberal Democrat campaign.
Yeah, exactly, let's hope so.
Serving sausages in Solihull, where Tim Farron's hoping to pile on votes.
Let's be generous. Yes. Let's be generous.
He says every vote for the Lib Dems sends a powerful message to Theresa May that she can't have it all her own way. Here, there were worries about cuts to school budgets.
But they are coming, and we've got past the point where you can shave a bit off this budget and that budget. The very clear evidence that all the capital money that should have been spending on upkeep of schools is actually going on keeping teachers in their jobs, but that's running out now.
Next stop, St Albans, where Mr Farron urged Labour voters to get behind the Lib Dems. He says that's the only way to prevent a Tory landslide.
How are you feeling?
Pleased to be in a pub.
And on to southwest London. Here the party hopes its promise of a referendum on the final Brexit deal will go down well with a large number of Remain voters.
For many voters, this election is the first chance to see and hear what Tim Farron has to offer. He's built his campaign around persuading those who voted to remain in the EU to swing behind the Liberal Democrats. But he's hoping that promises of more money for health and education will broaden the party's appeal.
The Lib Dems would put a penny on income tax to increase NHS and social care spending in England by £6 billion a year.
And if you want to send a message to Theresa May that you are not to be taken for granted, that the dementia tax is not to be given the all clear, and police and school and hospital cuts are not OK, the Liberal Democrats, the party you should get behind.
After a disastrous result 2 years ago, Tim Farron knows it's a long way back for the Lib Dems, but he's confident they are on the road to recovery. Vicky Young, BBC News, Twickenham.
Well, Paul Nuttall, the UKIP leader, has spent the final day of campaigning visiting target seats along the east coast of England. He wants the Brexit process completed by 2019 without the UK paying any exit fee. He also wants to reduce net migration. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth reports from the UKIP campaign trail in Essex.
Confident smiles for the last push. UKIP's leader paid a visit to one of the party's strongholds. They're convinced they still have a role, even now the UK's voted to leave the EU. UKIP says it's the guard dog of Brexit.
I think people are coming around to the idea that Theresa May won't give us the kind of Brexit that we really want.
The party's pushing its broader policies too. It's promised to cut immigration, improve security, put more money into the NHS by cutting back on foreign aid, protect British culture and promote a fair democracy. The leader says they're prepared to talk about things other politicians don't.
We've spoken openly about extremist Islamism within our society. I've called it a cancer, said it needs to be cut out, come up with a load of proposals how we could do that. The other parties wanted to ignore it.
UKIP had its best ever result at the last general election. This time it's standing fewer candidates in fewer seats, and the party is trying to prove it is still relevant beyond Brexit.
We're here to get troops from the past.
Supporters are convinced they've plenty to offer.
It seemed like your job's done, Brexit, that's done, you're finished. No, we're not.
Fresh English strawberries, 3 boxes for £1 out.
Not everyone agrees.
I voted UKIP last time.
So what changed your mind?
I like her. I like Theresa May.
I'll see you on Friday.
He knows he's fighting to prove UKIP still has a point, but says, whatever the result,
Bye-bye.
the party's not going anywhere. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Essex.
Well, in Scotland, the SNP leader, Nicola Sturgeon, told voters that supporting Labour, in her view, risked handing the keys of number 10 to the Conservatives and Theresa May. The SNP won almost every parliamentary seat in Scotland in 2015. Our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith, has been following the SNP campaign, and we can join her tonight in Edinburgh.
Here in Scotland, Hugh, the campaign has been dominated by the question of Scottish independence because it's only 3 months since the SNP called for a second referendum. But that hasn't proved as popular with voters as they might have hoped. The other parties have made their opposition to another independence vote absolutely central to this campaign. Quick word of warning, there are some flashing images in this report.
Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon.
The SNP, the party defined by Scottish independence, don't want it to define this campaign. Nicola Sturgeon would much rather talk about her opposition to Tory cuts and what she says voting SNP means.
It means voting for MPs who will stand against Tory austerity, voting for MPs who will stand up for investment in our public services, voting for MPs who will protect the incomes of pensioners, who will protect the winter fuel allowance, the triple lock, and who will protect free personal care and stand against a dementia tax.
They call this the Nicolopter, flying the SNP leader to all the places her party looks vulnerable. Having won 56 of Scotland's 59 seats 2 years ago, they're not fighting for new MPs, they're hoping to limit their losses.
Thank you. Hi.
Nicola Sturgeon believes Theresa May will win the election, but hopes to cut her majority.
You know, she called this election because she thought she could steamroller the opposition and have a landslide. But she's been found wanting. She's come across as weak and evasive. She can't answer basic questions. So it is possible that Scotland could stop her getting a bigger majority. We could hold the Tories in check.
The Scottish Tories have cast themselves as the only party who can stop a second independence referendum. They're hoping for a significant increase on their single Scottish seat as a result. The Lib Dems say a vote for them is the way to send a message to the SNP. Labour are fighting to keep their one MP in Scotland. They also oppose another independence vote. Their leader, Kezia Dugdale, has today called Nicola Sturgeon a liar for claiming she'd said she would support a referendum the day after the Brexit result. Ms Sturgeon says she stands by her version of the story 100%. Scottish voters are effectively being asked to use this election to signal whether or not they want another vote on independence. The outcome could well determine when or if that might happen. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Hawick.
Well, this election, certainly in the latter stages, was dominated by questions about security following those terror attacks in London and Manchester. But today, the parties were keen to refocus their core messages: Brexit for the Conservatives, the future of the NHS and public services for Labour. Our correspondent Christian Fraser looks now at some of the policy choices in these key areas.
So, have you decided? Maybe you haven't. In which case, it's probably worth looking at 2 or 3 of the big issues and where the parties stand on each of them. So we'll begin with the economy. The Conservatives are pledging to balance the budget by 2025. They've ruled out any increases to VAT, and they're sticking this time with the plans they've already set out on personal tax allowances and their cuts to corporation tax. Labour is pledging to inject £250 billion into the economy over the next 10 years. Again, there'd be no increase in VAT or in personal national insurance, but there would be a 50p tax rate and higher income taxes for the high earners, including those earning over £80,000. Now, if it's a hung parliament, then of course the SNP will play a much bigger role. They would support any plan to balance the UK budget for day-to-day spending over the next 5 to 7 years. There'd be no increase in tax on the low paid, in national insurance or in VAT. The Liberal Democrats also pledging to balance day-to-day spending while reducing national debt, but maybe this is their marquee policy. They'd add 1 penny to every pound on income tax, ring-fence the money, they say, for a world-class NHS. Let's take a look at another issue, a devolved issue, the NHS. Labour is planning to commit around £30 billion in extra funding over the next 5 years. They'd reverse privatisation and return health services into public control. The Conservatives would also put in more money, £8 billion up to 2023. And we know about social care. They will now include the value of your family home in any means testing for people receiving social care. That will, of course, be capped. The Liberal Democrats, we've talked about this issue. This is a big one on the doorstep, mental health. They'll ensure that mental health care is up to the same standard as physical health care in the country. And the Greens, again, rolling back the use of private providers in the NHS. We were told this was a Brexit election, so let's take a quick look at Brexit. Conservatives say they'll leave the single market and the customs union, seeking this deep and special relationship with the EU. But they've made it quite clear that no deal is better than a bad deal for the UK. Labour, well, that wouldn't do for them. They would scrap the Brexit white paper and put the emphasis on the single market and the customs union and remaining within it. And also, they want to immediately guarantee the rights of EU citizens living in Britain. The Liberal Democrats, pro-Remain of course, would hold a referendum on the final Brexit deal with that option in there to remain in the EU. And UKIP, they would quit the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, as well as the EU single market and the customs union. Can't go through all the policies and where the various parties stand, but it is all there on the BBC website. Do take a look. All the manifestos are there. bbc.co.uk, election 2017.
Christian Fraser with some of the policy choices. So, on the eve of polling, our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, is at Westminster. And Laura, I suppose I'd start by asking you how you would characterise the choice facing voters tomorrow.
Well, Hugh, at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, all the rallying, all the arguments, all the debates come to an end. We're at that moment when control slips from the politicians' grasp and goes over to all of us. And you know, in many ways, this has been a brutal, modern, unpredictable 21st century political campaign. It didn't turn out how anybody expected. But one thing's so interesting, for all it's very much a product of 2017. In many ways, it does remind us of a kind of politics that went some time ago, because the gulf between the two main parties, between Labour and Tory, is the biggest contrast that we have seen for many years. It is a real choice, a wide choice, and we've seen around the country that's what people have responded to. And whatever the result, in the last few elections we've seen a splintering of the control of the main two parties. But I suspect that tomorrow what we will see, and what's expected, is the biggest share for the two main parties that we've seen for quite some time. A return for the two tribes is something that has developed over the last couple of weeks. Now, of course, it's not as simple as that. It's not just one-dimensional. The situation is more complicated. The differences in Scotland and Northern Ireland, of course, are quite something to behold. But there is a sense, something retro about this campaign, even in this 21st century volatility. Labour, no question, have had a better time than they expected. But I have to say, watching both parties on the road today, the Tories appear to have recovered some of the sheen of their early self-confidence back at the start.
Suppose, Laura, it's also worth just underlining tonight, before the polls open, that whoever ends up in number 10 after tomorrow faces the scale of challenge, really, that we haven't seen for decades in this country.
You're absolutely right, Hugh, and it's not a very tempting inbox. A lot of people are anxious, living standards, wages are sluggish. There are, of course, huge uncertainties around what's happening around the world. Money for public services is very tight too. Whoever's in charge will have to watch the pennies carefully. But out there, above all the other issues, how will they take us out of the European Union? Whoever ends up in number 10 will be the one negotiator up against 27 other countries. And the deal they get or don't get for this country will shape our future for decades to come. It is quite some task for whoever manages to win this campaign. And you can't help wondering, as we heard one voter ask Theresa May today, why on earth does she really want the job?
Laura, once again, thank you very much. Laura Kuenssberg there, our political editor, with the latest thoughts there on the eve of polling at Westminster. We'll have more on the election in a while for you, but let's turn now to the day's other news. 8 people are now known to have died in the London Bridge attack on Saturday night. Police searching for a Frenchman who went missing during the attack found a body in the River Thames. Xavier Thomas, who is 45, had been in London with his girlfriend for the weekend. As our special correspondent Ed Thomas now tells us.
In the most darkest moments,
returning to London Bridge, the police officers who were the first to face the London attackers and comfort the injured. Here to lay flowers and remember those who died. In a city grateful for the bravery of officers like PC Green.
Obviously, it's really important to have that support from the public and obviously, but our thoughts are more so with the casualties and everything that happened here.
Thank you. And today, police searching for Xavier Thomas from France said they'd recovered a body from the Thames. He was on holiday in London with his girlfriend. She's now in hospital, seriously injured. And confirmed dead today, Ignacio Echeverria from Spain, last seen jumping off his bike to help a woman being stabbed. Also named Australian Sarah Zelenek. She was 21 and working as an au pair. Her family said she was a beautiful daughter and sister. In France, the family of Sébastien Bélanger confirmed he was also killed. It brings the total number of deaths to 8. While police continue to look for evidence, today this family home in Ilford was raided as officers pieced together more about the killers. Karam Butt, a known Islamist extremist, Rashid Radouan, a Moroccan-Libyan who once lived in Dublin, and Italian-Moroccan Youssef Zagba. Police in Italy suspected he wanted to join so-called Islamic State and say they told British intelligence agencies. Today his mother spoke anonymously.
He was closely followed when he was in Italy, but he wasn't at all in the UK, it seems. I was very happy with the work that the Italian police did. From what I read, it seems that in the UK they knew nothing. They weren't pursuing anything.
This investigation now reaches towards Morocco, Italy and Ireland, but the focus has always been here, East London, and those unanswered questions of how all 3 men met and planned their attack. Men known to British security services who went on to kill. Police insist there was no intelligence, an attack was being planned.
and we pray for those in our hospitals nearby.
This afternoon, prayers from all faiths on London Bridge. A message from a city to those who caused so much pain. Ed Thomas, BBC News, East London.
James Comey, the former director of the FBI who was sacked by President Trump, has revealed that the president demanded personal loyalty from him when the two had a private dinner back in January. Mr. Comey is due to give evidence to a congressional committee tomorrow against the background of allegations of collusion between some of the Trump team and Russia. Our North America editor, John Sopel, is at the White House. And, John, some of this evidence already in the public domain. It's been published. What do you make of this document?
It is the most fascinating document, Hugh, charting the most uneasy relationship between two men of totally different temperament, and just worth reading from it. It confirms that the president was not under direct investigation personally and was anxious that James Comey made that public. After Trump demanded that loyalty at a dinner here at the White House, Comey's account says, "I didn't move, speak or change my facial expression in any way during the awkward silence that followed. We simply looked at each other in silence." He asked James Comey to drop the investigation into Michael Flynn, the sacked National Security Advisor, a highly unusual thing for the president to do. And the president complained about the cloud hanging over him because of the Russia inquiry, but didn't ask for it to be stopped. And at one dinner, he protests his innocence over Russia, saying to Comey he had not been involved with hookers in Russia. So what does it all add up to? I think it shows the president behaved in a highly unorthodox, some would say totally inappropriate way. But does it show obstruction of justice that could lead to impeachment? In this document, no. But there are still a lot of other questions.
John, again, thank you. John Sopel there with the latest ahead of that evidence session there at the White House. In Tehran, gunmen and suicide bombers have attacked Iran's parliament, the shrine of its revolutionary leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, leaving 12 people dead and many more injured. The group calling itself Islamic State said it was responsible for one of the worst terror attacks Iran has suffered in decades. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale has this report.
It is the middle of the morning and Iran's parliament is under attack as never before. 4 gunmen, some reportedly dressed as women, have burst in, armed with grenades and explosive vests. Security forces surround the parliamentary complex as those inside, including children, try to escape. Incredibly, as the attack continues, some MPs in the chamber carry on with their parliamentary business. The group that calls itself Islamic State claims the gunmen are theirs. IS is fighting Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq, but this is the first time the Sunni jihadis have struck at the heart of Shia Iran. As the attack progresses, IS posts a video supposedly from inside. One gunman says, "Hold on," in English. Another shouts in Arabic, "We're staying forever." After 5 hours, the attackers are dead, leaving 11 people killed and many more injured. And there's more. A second, almost simultaneous attack a few miles away. Another suicide bomb at the shrine of the Ayatollah Khomeini, the founder of the Iranian Republic. There could be few more symbolic targets. One man is dead and others wounded. Iran's powerful Revolutionary Guards accuse Saudi Arabia and the US of being involved and promised revenge, deepening even further the long-standing tensions between Shia Iran and Sunni Arab states. James Landale, BBC News.
Friends and admirers of Ronnie Corbett gathered at Westminster Abbey today to remember the entertainer who died last year at the age of 85. He was best known for his partnership with Ronnie Barker in The Two Ronnies. Our arts correspondent David Sillitoe was at the service.
We're here to celebrate the life of Ronnie Corbett.
Name, Ronald Goliath Corbett.
Westminster Abbey is a place for solemn state occasions. Today, though, it was anything but. This was a celebration of a lifetime of laughter.
It's a memorial, but I might start laughing in Westminster Abbey and I will not apologise.
Happy feet, we've got those happy feet.
There'll be a lot of people who are laughing and a lot of people who are crying, and my memories is just laughs.
Look at Claude, it's so absurd.
These are friends and colleagues from the days of Cabaret, The Frost Report, The Two Ronnies, 60 years of show business memories. And inside, a certain easy chair, and behind it, a very specific number of candles.
4 candles.
No, 4 candles.
Well, there you are, 4 candles.
No, 4 candles. Handles for forks.
Becoming friends with this remarkable man that I'd admired for as long as I can remember was truly one of the great pleasures of my life. And we'd talk on the phone. I still have many I still have many of his answer phone messages. Good heavens. Wonderful. And he'd come to the phone and always say, "Is it me?"
It was the final goodbye from them, goodbye from him, and a walk past the one empty seat. David Sillito, BBC News, Westminster Abbey.
The tributes to Ronnie Corbett today at the Abbey. Let's have more then on the election. And as millions of people prepare to go to the polls tomorrow, the outcome of the vote will be decided in dozens of key marginal seats around the United Kingdom. Jeremy Vine is here with me at the election centre to look at the constituencies being targeted by the parties. Those battleground seats, Jeremy.
Indeed, the ones we always talk about, Hugh, thank you. And here is the map on the floor, the result of the last election. Let's look at the challenges for the parties in this one, starting with the Conservatives. The seats they only just won last time, this first column here. Now, if they were to lose just the first column of so-called marginal seats, they would lose their overall majority in the House of Commons. Let's have a look at their targets. Let's turn it around here, though, and wonder what happens if the Conservatives advance. So they might well take Chester, Ealing Central and Acton, Berwickshire and Roxburgh, the ones they came closest to last time. If they went across this board, they would have a very, very healthy majority in the House of Commons. Take them all the way across the next board as well, another 32 seats, you would call that a landslide to the Conservatives. Now, Labour did badly in the last election in 2015, so they really need to improve. Let's look at the seats they came closest to winning last time. Gower, the Conservatives won by only 27 votes, and Derby North and Croydon Central and the Vale of Clwyd and so on. Labour need to win the whole of this board, that's 32 seats, plus half the next board, just to become the biggest single party in the House of Commons. But they need to win all the seats here and the whole of the third board, another 32 seats to have an overall majority. So it's a huge mountain to climb because they're starting from such a long way back. So too are the Liberal Democrats. For them, well, they were reduced to only 8 seats in the House of Commons. Let's see them here. These are the ones they won in 2015. They surely have to defend them. They could win the whole of this board, though, another 32, and still not be where they were when they came out of their very successful 2010 election with 57 seats. So they really need to make some advances here. Different story for the SNP, who, as we heard earlier from Sarah Smith, took nearly everything in Scotland last time. These are the 32 most marginal SNP seats, starting with the one that was closest last time, Berwickshire, then Dumbartonshire East, which the Liberal Democrats had last, Edinburgh West and so on. But even though those ones may be tight to hold on to, they could lose the first 2 columns and still be far and away the biggest party in Scotland. So there are other parties, of course, involved as well. In Northern Ireland, a wholly different situation going on there. We have the Welsh Nationalists, we have UKIP, and we have the Greens. The key thing tomorrow night is just to watch the colours on the map, see how they change, and see who's up and who's down.
We'll be watching. Jeremy, thanks very much. Jeremy Vine there at the BBC Election Centre. And as we've heard, one of those Labour seats being targeted by the Conservatives is Halifax in West Yorkshire. Labour held on to it at the last election with a slim majority of under 500, and the voters of Halifax supported leaving the EU in last year's referendum. Our correspondent Jeremy Cook has been to Halifax to take the electoral temperature on the eve of polling day.
A town built on industry, reshaped by the winds of globalisation, steering now into the post-industrial landscape.
This was built to serve Halifax, but then Sowerby Bridge itself was an important textile town.
Halifax is Labour by tradition, Brexit by clear majority, and Tory, well, it's a key Conservative target seat.
Are you voting tomorrow? Are you voting tomorrow?
I'll be voting, yeah.
What will be on your mind? What will be the main thing on your mind when you vote tomorrow? Main issue?
The main issue is the national health, I suppose, and pensions.
The issues for me, as a director of a small company, are to do with the money that we have left behind when we've paid for everything in order to pay for wages and pay for the things we need.
So tax?
Tax, and particularly corporation tax.
At the Halifax Bowling Club, they know that there's everything to play for.
Slow down, slow down.
The Labour majority here is just 428, a hard position to defend.
Let me ask you about the election tomorrow.
Yeah.
What's the most important issue?
Policing. We're not safe on the streets anymore. In Halifax, you never see a bobby on the street.
It's about Brexit for you, isn't it?
It's all about Brexit, and I think it should be for everybody else as well. I feel a bit of guilt, but not a lot of guilt, that I've actually changed in my vote. I've voted Labour all my life. This is one time I'm voting Tory.
In the converted mill, which is now the Play Palace, Kelly's dropped by with her 2 children. She's made a conscious decision not to vote.
I've never ever felt a benefit from anything they've promised to do or failed to do.
You're not voting tomorrow, what will you be doing?
I'll be working tomorrow, providing for my family.
Up the road at Riz's barber shop, there's plenty of political chat.
Tuition fees, they're knocking them out a window.
They're talking minimum wage, tax, student funding.
The main important issues in this campaign for me were getting student funds and stuff. So voting Labour would help getting more student funds. As for myself, I am a student.
They call it a key marginal, and the election result in Halifax tomorrow could be a strong indicator of the future political direction, not just of this town, but of the nation beyond. Jeremy Cook, BBC News, Halifax.
More from the campaign, and in one of his final campaign messages, the co-leader of the Greens, Jonathan Bartley, said that people were facing a stark choice at this election.
We feel that we're at a fork in the road, and if you don't want to waste £110 billion on Trident, if you want to look at ideas that are going to make the country fit for the 21st century, like a universal basic income, like a shorter working week, if you believe you want more investment in the NHS than any other party is offering, then you need to vote for the Green Party.
Jonathan Bartley for the Green Party there. And in Wales, Leanne Wood has told voters that a strong Welsh voice in the Brexit process can only be guaranteed by Plaid Cymru. She said that Labour had taken Wales for granted, and she warned that re-electing a Conservative government would pose a threat to public services in all parts of Wales.
We face a number of different threats from a Tory government with an increased mandate, threats to people in our communities, threats to our NHS, and threats to the process of leaving the European Union, to jobs and livelihoods.
Leanne Wood there of Plaid Cymru speaking today. So let's have more from the campaign in Wales and in Northern Ireland. Chris Buckler is at Stormont. We'll go to Chris in a moment. First, let's join Sean Lloyd in Cardiff. Sean?
Hugh, I'm outside City Hall, which is where some of the Welsh vote will be counted tomorrow. But how will voters here really pick their way through the general election issues? Because so many of them are devolved and lines really have been blurred, because UK manifestos have been making pledges about devolved issues like health and education. Now, Brexit has been a key issue here. Wales voted to leave the European Union. Different parties have very different views about how EU funding should be replaced. Labour has traditionally been the strongest party, but we really have had some insight into how the Conservatives are viewing Wales this time. 3 visits from the Theresa May during this election campaign. Jeremy Corbyn was in North Wales today, but it really has been the First Minister, Carwyn Jones, who's led the charge for Labour here in Wales under the brand of Welsh Labour, which they say has been successful in the past. Now, Plaid Cymru hope to make gains this time. Rhondda and Ynys Môn target seats for them, and the Liberal Democrats, well, they are defending 1 seat, Ceredigion.
Here in Northern Ireland, this Westminster election has been dominated by talk of Stormont. Not that much is happening in the rather gloomy-looking Parliament buildings behind me. Power sharing collapsed at the start of the year, and the talks to try to restore it have been interrupted by this vote. Election campaigns are no time for compromise, particularly here, and there have been angry exchanges between the DUP and Sinn Féin, their differences really exposed by this campaign. There is also a real sense of competition. In the last vote here, an Assembly election held just a matter of a few months ago, Sinn Féin came within a fraction of a single percentage point of matching the DUP's share of the vote, so there's pride as well as seats on the line tomorrow. As for the other parties, the Alliance, the SDLP and the Ulster Unionists, they're all urging people to vote for them rather than the DUP and Sinn Féin, to send a message that they are sick of the squabbling. They also say that Northern Ireland desperately needs a devolved government, particularly as Brexit negotiations begin. They say they need a voice because any deal will have a major impact here, not least because this is the only part of the UK to share a land border with another EU country.
All right, Chris, thanks very much. Chris Buckler in Stormont, and thanks to you, Sean, as well, at City Hall there in Cardiff. So we've had 7 weeks of campaigning in the election that was never meant to happen because Theresa May said last summer that there'd be no election until 2020. It's been a volatile campaign at times involving policy changes, interview gaffes, controversy about debates, and more recently, of course, the terror attacks at the Manchester Arena and at London Bridge. As Election Day finally beckons, our chief correspondent, Gavin Hewitt, looks back now at the 2017 campaign.
It was the secret shared with a tight circle, a snap election.
I have just chaired a meeting of the Cabinet where we agreed that the government should call a general election.
The purpose, to strengthen the Prime Minister's hand in Brexit negotiations. Pundits spoke of landslides, but not all voters welcomed another poll.
You're joking. Not another one?
The early focus of the campaign, the leader herself. Theresa May's name dwarfed that of her party. The message, repeated often, was a claim to strength.
This election is about ensuring that we have strong and stable leadership in this country in the national interest.
For her main opponent, Jeremy Corbyn, Brexit wasn't his priority. He chose another narrative, fairness.
Are we going to be a country that works only to make the richest even richer?
Other parties set out their preferred battlegrounds.
An opportunity for the British people to choose to change the direction of our country, to reject a hard Brexit.
A vote for the SNP is a vote to protect Scotland's interests.
UKIP goes into this snap election determined to hold the government's feet to the fire on Brexit.
But the launch of the two main parties' manifestos underlined the political divide. The Labour manifesto offered a surge in public spending, all paid for by high earners and business.
Labour will scrap tuition fees.
The Conservatives promised economic security and low taxes, but they also took on the rising cost of social care. People's houses would be included in determining how much they paid. There was concern on the doorsteps. Some cried U-turn. Theresa May said clarification.
Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed.
Then Jeremy Corbyn sprung a surprise. At the last moment, he agreed to take part in a leaders' debate. Theresa May stayed away. The campaign's sharp divisions were laid bare.
And we have to stop thinking, as you do, that there's a magic money tree.
Have you been to a food bank? Have you seen people sleeping around our station?
A clear choice was emerging. Labour staking its case on boosting funding for public services, the Conservatives rooting their message in a sound economy and leadership. And then came terror, multiple casualties and the campaign suspended twice. Never before had an election suffered two attacks in different cities. There was unity, but Theresa May found herself defending her record on police numbers and Jeremy Corbyn having to defend his opposition to anti-terror legislation. So this wasn't just a Brexit election, although negotiations start 11 days after the poll. This campaign paraded old differences over tax and spending and the economy. It has been a campaign that didn't follow the expected script. It has offered starkly different visions, paths that will define Britain for years to come. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News.
Yes, that was our chief correspondent there, Gavin Hewitt, looking back at the past 7 weeks as Britain prepares now to head for the polls tomorrow. And the BBC's election coverage starts tomorrow night at 5 to 10 on BBC One. We'll bring you all the results as they come in overnight. And I'll have the full story, the gains and losses and who's likely to be occupying number 10 as we head into the morning. Until then, that's it from the BBC's Election Centre. Have a good night.